A teenage girl left her high school prom in 2002, stepping out into the night in her shimmering dress, and was never seen again. Despite desperate searches and endless rumors, no trace of her was ever found, and the case slipped into 15 years of silence, another unsolved legend whispered in the town. Until two hikers wandering deep in the woods stumbled upon a scrap of fabric buried in the soil, a discovery that would unravel a terrifying truth hidden just beneath the surface. The last known image of her is frozen in time. A photograph taken on the school's front steps just before the night began. She's standing with her friends, cheeks flushed from excitement, a shimmering blue dress catching the glare of the camera's flash. A corsage of white roses is pinned delicately to her wrist. Around her, a cluster of classmates smile nervously, caught between childhood and adulthood, their futures stretching just beyond graduation. In that moment, nothing seemed more important than the music, the lights, and the magic of prom night. It was May of 2002, in a town where life moved at a slower rhythm. The prom had been held in the high school gymnasium, transformed for one night into something out of a fairy tale. Crepe paper streamers hung from the rafters, balloons clustered in corners, and a rented disco ball cast flecks of light that shimmered like falling stars. Parents had lined up outside earlier to take photos, clutching disposable cameras, eager to capture the milestone their children would remember forever. She was 17 years old, full of ambition, and weeks away from graduation. Teachers often described her as bright and disciplined, the kind of student who stayed after class to finish assignments. Her friends remembered her as warm, quick to laugh, and always the one to insist they pose for a picture. That night, she glowed. She danced, she laughed, she posed for endless snapshots with friends and classmates. She texted her mother a quick, "Love you, I'll be home late, sometime after 10. Just as the DJ launched into a string of early 2000s hits that shook the gym floor. No one who watched her that evening suspected they were seeing her alive for the last time. As the hours wore on, the gym thinned. Groups of friends left for after-parties, some to diners, others to house gatherings that had been whispered about. All week, by midnight she was still there, still smiling, though noticeably quieter. A few friends would later recall that she seemed distracted, as though her attention kept flicking toward the gym doors. One classmate thought he saw her step outside briefly to take a phone call, her hand pressed over her ear to block out the thrum of music. Another remembered her saying she felt tired and was thinking of heading home. Their memories weren't clear, blurred by the passage of time and the haze of that night's excitement. What is certain is this: sometime between midnight and past, she left the building. She was last seen in the parking lot, the sequins of her dress catching the faint glow of the streetlights. She was alone. Some say they saw her pause, as if waiting for someone. Others claimed a dark sedan was idling nearby, its headlights dimmed. None of it could ever be verified. Back at her house, a modest single-story home with a white porch light that her mother always left on, the family was expecting her return. Prom night was supposed to run late, and no one worried when midnight came and went. By 2 a.m., her father stirred awake on the living room couch where he had dozed off waiting. He checked the driveway, empty. He told himself she must have gone to a friend's house. Still, he left the porch light on, just in case. When morning came, the light was still burning. Her bedroom was untouched, the bed neatly made, her favorite stuffed animal propped on the pillow where she'd left it. Her phone, usually buzzing with messages, was silent. By noon, unease turned into dread. Her mother began calling her friends, each conversation deepening the sense that something was wrong. No one had seen her since the parking lot. The town itself seemed to sense the shift in the air. Parents who had been reminiscing about prom night only hours earlier now spoke in hushed tones. The school bulletin board, still decorated with leftover streamers and glitter, became a backdrop for whispered rumors. Maybe she ran away. Maybe she went off with someone older. Maybe she was already halfway across the state. But those closest to her knew better. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't the kind of girl to vanish without a word. She had college applications in the works, a part-time job at the library, and plans to tour campuses that summer. Everything pointed forward, toward a life just beginning. And yet, by the end of that first day, she was already slipping into the void of unanswered questions. That night, as the sun set and the porch light clicked on again, her family made the call they had been resisting all afternoon. They dialed the police. A 17-year-old girl, last seen in her prom dress, had not come home. What began as a quiet family worry was about to ignite into the town's most haunting mystery. The first official record of her disappearance begins with the 911 call placed just after dusk on May 19, 2002. By then, more than 18 hours had passed since she had been seen leaving the school parking lot. Her parents' voices, tight with worry, carried over the line as they explained that their daughter had not come home after prom. They described what she was wearing: a shimmering blue dress, silver heels, a corsage still pinned to her wrist. They repeated that she was 17 years old, a senior at the local high school, and had no history of running away. The dispatcher logged the report and notified patrol officers. Within an hour, a squad car rolled slowly down the quiet residential street where the family lived, its headlights sweeping across the porch where her mother waited. She clutched the last printed photo from the night before, the one taken on the school steps, as though the frozen smile could somehow provide answers. The officers began with routine questions. Had there been an argument at home? Was there a boyfriend? Could she have chosen to stay with friends and lost track of time? Each possibility was raised, and each was swiftly knocked down. The family insisted this was out of character. She was responsible, level-headed, and would never vanish without calling. The timeline was then carefully reconstructed. She had arrived at prom with friends at 8 p.m., multiple classmates recalled seeing her dance and mingle throughout the evening. Around midnight, she told one friend she was leaving. Another classmate said she had been spotted outside on her phone, her expression serious. A third claimed she was seen walking alone toward the far end of the parking lot, where streetlights thinned into shadows. Beyond that, the accounts fractured. The school's parking lot by morning had already been scrubbed clean of clues. Empty soda cans and discarded balloons were all that remained of the celebration. Tire marks faded into the pavement, indistinguishable from dozens of others. The silver streamers that had been taped to the gym doors fluttered listlessly in the wind. It was as though the night had been swept away, leaving behind only absence. Her phone records, pulled within days, showed a final outgoing call made at 12:17 a.m., just minutes after she was last seen. The call was placed to an unknown number, one not registered to any classmate or family contact. It lasted only 20 seconds before disconnecting. After that, her phone went silent. No further calls. No texts. By morning, it was either switched off or destroyed. Detectives canvassed the school, knocking on doors, interviewing chaperones and teachers. Most remembered nothing unusual. One teacher mentioned seeing her slip out early, but assumed she had left for an after-party. Another recalled overhearing a heated whisper between two students about a car parked near the edge of the lot. These fragments, inconclusive and often contradictory, only deepen the mystery. The first 24 hours are the most critical. In any missing persons case, investigators knew this. By that evening, search efforts began in earnest. Officers and volunteers combed the wooded areas bordering the school, flashlights cutting beams through the darkness. They scanned ditches along the roadside, calling her name into the night air. At dawn, helicopters circled above, their rotors thrumming over fields and streams, while canine units were brought in to track her scent. The dogs picked up a trail near the parking lot, but lost it quickly along a road leading north, a stretch where it would have been easy for someone to pull up unnoticed, open a car door, and drive away with her. At home, her family clung to hope. They sat by the phone, waiting for it to ring. Every call jolted them upright, only to collapse into despair when it wasn't her. Her mother kept pacing the front porch, glancing at the driveway as if her daughter might walk up at any moment, laughing off the worry and apologizing for being late. By the second day, The story had broken across local news. Anchors read her name aloud, flashing her prom photo on the screen. Reporters gathered outside the high school, interviewing classmates who described her as bright, dependable, and unlikely to have run off. Flyers bearing her picture multiplied on lampposts, grocery store bulletin boards, and church doors. But as the hours ticked into days, no solid leads emerged. The final confirmed sighting remained the same: a teenage girl in a glittering dress, stepping into the night and vanishing as though the darkness had swallowed her whole. Investigators began to confront a chilling reality. If she had left the prom of her own free will, she should have surfaced by now, at a friend's house, a relative's, anywhere. But she hadn't, which meant the possibilities narrowed too. Something far darker. A disappearance was no longer a late return. It was the beginning of a nightmare. By the third day, the case had shifted from anxious hope to grim determination. The missing posters, freshly printed and stapled to telephone poles, fluttered in the spring wind. Her face, smiling, alive, radiant in her prom dress, now stared out over gas stations, diners, and storefronts across town. The photo that had once been a keepsake was now an urgent plea. "Have you seen her?" The police set up their command post at the edge of the high school gym, the place where she had last been seen. From there, they began the exhausting work of retracing her steps. Every inch of the parking lot was examined. Detectives crouched low, flashlights in hand, inspecting cracks in the asphalt for scraps of fabric, drops of blood, anything that might have been missed in those crucial early hours. What they found was little, but enough to spark questions. Near a patch of gravel at the far edge of the lot, an officer noted faint impressions in the dirt, tire tracks angled sharply toward the road. Too faint to match to a specific vehicle, but suggestive of a car that had stopped there briefly. Just feet away, lying half-hidden in the grass, was a silver sandal. It matched the description of the shoes she had been wearing that night. The discovery chilled her family. The shoe was bagged and tagged, photographed from every angle, but it provided no answers. Had it been lost in a struggle? Or simply slipped off as she ran toward a car? Without more evidence, the meaning remained agonizingly uncertain. Search and rescue teams fanned out beyond the school grounds. Volunteers formed human chains, moving shoulder to shoulder through fields and thickets, their boots crunching through dead leaves as they called her name. The woods bordering the town were dense and unforgiving, filled with brambles that tore at clothing and shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. Each rustle of leaves, each sudden crack of a twig brought people to a halt, their hearts thundering with the thought that they might have found her. But every search ended the same, empty-handed. The local river was dragged. Divers, their faces grim beneath the surface of the water, methodically scoured the muddy riverbed. They brought up branches, trash, and twisted metal, but nothing that belonged to her. Helicopters swept the area, their searchlights cutting across fields at night, illuminating deer that scattered into the trees. Still, no trace. Detectives turned to the people who might know her best, her classmates. They moved from house to house, speaking quietly with teenagers still reeling from prom night. Some broke down in tears. Others whispered rumors that she had been seen with someone older, that she had been planning to leave town, that she had gotten into a car willingly. But when pressed, none of these accounts held firm. Memories contradicted one another. Timelines overlapped. No one could say for certain what had happened after midnight. Her diary, seized from her bedroom, offered no evidence of a runaway. Instead, its final entries were filled with the excitement of prom, notes about exams, and sketches of outfits she wanted for graduation. It was the diary of a girl making plans for the future, not someone planning to disappear. The family's home became a revolving door of investigators. They sifted through her computer, her school bag, her emails. They interviewed relatives, co-workers at her part-time job at the library, even distant acquaintances. Again and again, the same picture emerged. She was dependable, grounded, and had no reason to vanish voluntarily. By the end of the week, the case dominated local headlines. Reporters set up outside the school, microphones thrust toward anyone willing to speak. The story spread across the state. National networks picked it up briefly, flashing her photo on late-night broadcasts before moving on to the next tragedy. For the family, it was surreal. Their daughter's disappearance had transformed into a public spectacle, her face plastered on screens while they waited by the silent phone. Inside the police department, frustration was mounting. The lead detective, a man hardened by decades of cases that had gone nowhere, studied the evidence laid out across his desk. The shoe, the faint tire tracks, the silent phone records. None of it pointed cleanly in any direction. The scene was too neat, too absent of the chaos one might expect if a girl had been forcibly taken in a crowded parking lot. It was as though she had simply been erased. Still, the investigation pressed forward. They released a statement urging anyone who had been near the school that night to come forward. Drivers who had passed along the road, residents who might have seen a strange car idling in the dark. Every tip was logged, no matter how small. But each lead seemed to end in dust. For her family, the days blurred together. Her mother, exhausted and hollow-eyed, refused to leave the porch light off at night. Her father paced the living room, staring out the window at the empty driveway. Friends and neighbors stopped by with food, but it went untouched. The house was silent, save for the constant ringing of the phone. Investigators, reporters, strangers calling with supposed sightings that dissolved under scrutiny. By the 10th day, the case was officially reclassified. No longer treated as a simple missing person, it was now a suspected abduction. The FBI was contacted for assistance. A profile was drafted. A teenage girl, vulnerable, last seen alone. Theories multiplied. Maybe she had been lured into a vehicle by someone she trusted. Maybe a stranger had stalked her as she left the prom. Or maybe she had gotten into a car willingly, unaware of the danger waiting inside. The tragedy was no longer a family's private nightmare. It was now the town's darkest secret, a mystery that had begun to take on a life of its own. And yet, for all the manpower, all the search grids and interviews and theories, the most important fact remained unchanged. A 17-year-old girl had left her high school gym after prom and had never come home. The shift from search to suspicion happened quietly, almost inevitably. In the earliest days, hope had clung stubbornly to the idea that she was simply lost, perhaps injured in the woods, maybe hiding with friends. But as time passed and no sign of her appeared, investigators began to turn their gaze toward the people in her orbit. The first name to surface was an older boyfriend. He was in his early 20s, a college dropout who still lived in the area. The relationship had been whispered about among her classmates, but was never openly acknowledged. Police records showed they had argued weeks before prom, though about what, no one could say. His name was quickly pulled into the center of the investigation. Detectives brought him in for questioning. The cameras in the station captured a young man shifting nervously in his seat, his hair unkempt, his answers wavering between defensiveness and confusion. He admitted they had dated casually, but insisted it had ended months earlier. He claimed he hadn't spoken to her in weeks. But when pressed, inconsistencies emerged. A classmate swore she had seen him parked outside the school on prom night, sitting in his car as students filtered out. Another said she had overheard him mention meeting someone after the dance, though the name was never revealed. The young man denied it all, but suspicion clung to him. Investigators searched his car, his home, his phone records. They found nothing definitive, no trace of her belongings, no forensic evidence linking him to the night she vanished. Still, he remained a shadow over the case, a figure half in and half out of the story. The second thread came from inside the school itself. A rumor spread about one of the coaches, a man in his 40s who had always lingered a little too long after practices. He was well-liked in town, a fixture at community events, but students whispered about the way he singled out certain girls for attention. Investigators interviewed him as part of their widening net. His demeanor was calm, rehearsed, as he explained that he had gone home immediately after prom ended. His wife corroborated his story. Yet, buried in the interviews, a disturbing note appeared. One student reported seeing him talking to her near the gym doors earlier that evening. Another recalled her looking uncomfortable, glancing away as though she wanted to leave. The detail was never confirmed, but it lingered in the file, a stain that could not be erased. Then there was the stranger. Several witnesses described a car parked near the far end of the lot, its headlights dimmed. The descriptions varied. Some said it was dark blue, others black. One student thought it was a sedan, another swore it was an SUV. None of them caught the license plate. The idea of an unknown vehicle, lurking in the shadows, haunted investigators. Could she have willingly stepped into that car? Or was she forced? The question gnawed at every theory that followed. Tips began pouring in. A waitress in a diner 2 towns over claimed she had served a girl matching her description the night after prom, sitting in a booth with an older man. The girl had seemed nervous, glancing often toward the door. Detectives followed the lead, reviewing receipts, surveillance footage, interviewing staff. Nothing matched. It was a dead end. Another call came from a truck driver who swore he had seen a teenage girl walking along the highway at dawn, barefoot, her dress dirty and torn. He pulled over to help, but by the time he turned around, she was gone. His account was earnest, detailed, but exhaustive searches of the area revealed nothing. Each lead was followed, each one crumbled. Theories sprouted like weeds, choking the investigation. Some in town believed she had run away, perhaps with someone older, chasing a romantic dream beyond the small town. Others were convinced she had been abducted by a stranger, a random act of violence on the wrong night at the wrong place. Her family rejected the runaway theory outright. Her mother spoke tearfully at a press conference, her voice breaking as she described her daughter's dreams of college, her excitement for graduation, the way she talked about becoming a teacher. She didn't run away, her mother insisted. Someone took her from us? The community was divided. At church gatherings, in grocery store aisles, at the gas station counter, people whispered their theories. Some pointed fingers at the older boyfriend, others at the coach. Still others said it was neither, that she had been preyed upon by someone passing through, a predator who vanished into the night. The police worked furiously to keep up with the flood of tips. They cross-checked alibis, examined receipts, pulled phone records. They brought in specialists to analyze the tire tracks found in the lot, but the results were inconclusive. The tracks could have been made by any number of vehicles. The investigation consumed the town. News vans camped on corners, broadcasting live updates. Her friends struggled to move on, caught between grief and fear. Teachers tried to keep classes moving, but the empty desk in the classroom was a constant reminder. And yet, through all the noise, the case refused to break open. Every suspect slipped through the cracks. Every lead dissolved into nothing. The investigation was a wheel spinning in the mud, throwing up dirt but going nowhere. In the end, what lingered were shadows, an older boyfriend whose alibi didn't quite fit, a teacher whose attention had been questionable, a car parked where it shouldn't have been, and a string of sightings that evaporated under scrutiny. The truth lay hidden just out of reach, while the town descended into whispers and doubt. The search for answers had begun to fracture under the weight of too many possibilities. The weeks stretched into months, and the town's energy, once frantic, once electric with the need to find her, began to wane. The search parties dwindled. Volunteers who had scoured the woods night after night returned to their jobs, their families, their ordinary routines. The posters taped to storefronts, and telephone poles grew tattered, their edges curling, colors fading in the sun. Eventually, rain blurred the ink until her face was nothing more than a ghostly silhouette behind the word "missing." Inside the police department, the file on her case grew thicker with each passing week, each dead-end lead folded into the pile. Detectives cycled through, some retiring, some transferring, each leaving their notes, their theories, their frustrations scrawled in the margins. For a while, her disappearance had been the most active case in the county, with resources pulled from neighboring towns, even the FBI lending support. But as time wore on and nothing broke, priorities shifted. New crimes, new tragedies filled the headlines, and her name appeared less and less. For the family, though, the silence was unbearable. Her mother kept her bedroom exactly as it had been on the night of prom. The bed was made, the stuffed animal still resting on her pillow. Her dress shoes, the pair she'd worn for every school dance, sat neatly in the corner. Dust gathered, but nothing was touched. Her mother said it felt like if she changed anything, she'd be admitting her daughter wasn't coming back. Every anniversary of her disappearance, the family gathered in the town square for a candlelight vigil. The first year, hundreds of people came, candles flickering like a sea of tiny stars against the dark. They sang hymns, they prayed, they held posters of her smiling face. By the 5th year, only a fraction remained. By the 10th, it was mostly family and a few close friends, standing in silence, their candles trembling in the night air. Rumors became folklore. Teenagers whispered about the girl who vanished after prom, turning her into a ghost story told at slumber parties and whispered behind lockers. Some said she ran away with an older man. Others claimed she was taken by someone passing through. The details blurred until the truth was smothered by myth. To the younger kids growing up, she wasn't a girl they knew. She was the prom queen who never came home. Her father spent countless hours in his truck, driving rural roads, pulling over at abandoned barns, creek beds, and roadside clearings, convinced that he might stumble on a clue everyone else had missed. He never did. But still, he drove. Her mother became a constant presence at the police station, pressing for updates, demanding answers, refusing to let her daughter's case be forgotten. Each time, the detectives offered polite words, sympathetic tones, but no breakthroughs. The years ground on. The seasons changed. The world moved forward, but for her family, time stopped in 2002. Graduation ceremonies came and went, but her name was never called. Her friends grew older, moved away, got married, had children. She remained frozen at 17, forever the girl in the blue dress, smiling in the flash of a camera. Detectives tried to revisit the case every few years, pulling the file from the shelf, flipping through reports, following up on cold tips. One investigator described it as digging through fog. The longer it lingered, the less there was to hold on to. Witnesses moved, memories blurred, alibis became impossible to verify. The once bright trail of evidence had dissolved into dust. By the 15th year, the case was officially labeled cold. Her photo, once taped to the walls of the sheriff's office, was moved to a binder in a drawer. The phone tip lines still existed, but the calls came rarely now, and most were cranks, or people who swore they'd had visions. For the family, there was no such thing as closure. Not knowing was its own kind of torment. Was she out there somewhere? Alive, waiting to be found? Or had she been buried in the earth all along? A secret the town walked over every day without realizing. Every night, her mother lit a candle by the window, a fragile flame against the darkness. It was a ritual, a silent promise that she would never stop waiting for her daughter to come home. The investigation was no longer active. The case had faded from public memory. But beneath the surface, in the woods that bordered the town, the truth remained, hidden, patient, waiting for the day it would finally be unearthed. The years had stacked up, one on top of another, until her disappearance became little more than a local legend. 15 anniversaries had come and gone. Her mother still lit a candle in the window every night, but the rest of the town had long since moved on. The story was spoken of in hushed tones, like a ghost story passed between generations. And then, in the spring of 2017, the silence cracked. 2 hikers were cutting through the dense woods on the outskirts of town, an area locals rarely ventured. The trail was unofficial, little more than a deer path winding between thickets and moss-covered logs. They weren't searching for anything. One of them, a schoolteacher on his day off, had simply wanted a longer hike than usual. The other, his friend, had brought along a camera to photograph wildflowers. It was late afternoon when they stumbled on it. A shallow depression in the soil, just off the trail, where the earth looked disturbed. At first, they assumed it was the work of an animal. Coyotes often dug for small prey, leaving churned earth and scattered leaves. But something pale, something fabric-like, protruded from the ground. The first hiker bent down, brushing away dirt with the edge of his shoe. The soil shifted easily, loosened by rain. What emerged was a strip of fabric, faded and dirty, but still glimmering faintly in the light. The color was unmistakable, a dull, weather blue. He froze. His friend leaned closer, snapping a picture at first, thinking it was discarded trash. But as more of the fabric was uncovered, the shape became clear. It wasn't a random rag. It was a piece of a dress, torn, buried, preserved beneath the soil for years. Their laughter died instantly. They stepped back, suddenly aware of the silence pressing in around them. The woods felt heavier, darker, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. The first hiker crouched again, this time carefully brushing aside more of the soil with his hands. Beneath the fabric, pale bone glinted through the earth. Not smooth like a branch, not jagged like a rock, but curved, fragile, unmistakably human. A rib, small and brittle, pressing through the dirt. He stumbled backward, his voice catching. In his throat, This isn't right. The second hiker pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed 911. The dispatcher answered calmly, asking for their location. The man tried to explain, his words stumbling over one another. He described the trail, the creek they had crossed earlier, the stand of birch trees just behind them. We found something. A dress, bones, human bones. The dispatcher's voice remained steady, instructing them to stay put, to mark the area if they could, to touch nothing else. Officers were on their way. Minutes later, the two men sat on a fallen log, a good distance from the site, their faces pale, their eyes locked on the patch of disturbed earth. Neither spoke. The only sound was the distant call of birds, oblivious to the horror that had been uncovered. When deputies arrived, the hikers led them to the site. The officers stood in silence, staring at the fabric, the bones pressing through the soil. One of them pulled crime scene tape from his kit, marking off the area. The other radioed for backup. What had begun as a casual hike had now become a crime scene, one that reopened the town's darkest mystery. Soon, the woods buzzed with activity. More deputies, then investigators, then a forensic team. They set up a perimeter, carefully photographing every angle before beginning the excavation. The soil was loosened grain by grain, brushed away with small tools more often seen in archaeology than in law enforcement. The prom dress emerged slowly, its fabric frayed but still intact in places, the sequins dulled by 15 years underground. It was twisted and torn, but unmistakable. Her mother had described it in heartbreaking detail during those first interviews back in 2002. The color, the shimmer, the way she had smiled when she first tried it on. Now, here it was, pulled from the earth like a cruel echo of that night. Beneath the dress lay the rest of her remains. A skeletal form curled slightly on its side, as though abandoned in haste. The bones were discolored, fragile, but whole enough to leave no doubt. After 15 years of silence, the girl who had vanished after prom had finally been found. For the investigators on scene, the discovery was chilling. The burial was shallow, careless, as though someone had been in a hurry. And yet, it was. Deep enough that the remains had gone undisturbed for over a decade, hidden beneath layers of leaves and soil until a chance, rainstorm, and the curiosity of two hikers finally brought them back into the light. Word spread quickly. Within hours, the family was notified. The phone call they had both dreaded and longed for finally came. Their daughter had been found, but she was not walking through the door with an apology for being late. She was lying. In the earth, her prom dress still wrapped around her, a silent testament to a night that should have been the beginning of everything but had instead marked its end. The discovery was not closure. It was devastation. But for investigators, it was also something else. A second chance. The case, long considered a ghost, had come alive again. What had once been a missing person was now a homicide. And the question that had haunted the town for 15 years burned brighter than ever. Who had led her into the woods that night, and why? The discovery in the woods did not end the story. It only shifted it. For investigators, what lay beneath the soil was not just an answer. It was a new beginning, one that forced them to reopen every page of a case they thought they had buried years ago. The remains were carefully transported to the county medical examiner's office, a quiet building that now carried the weight of the town's darkest secret. The forensic anthropologist, a woman seasoned by decades of examining the unthinkable, approached the task with reverence. She knew that every bone, every scrap of fabric, every fiber might hold the key to unraveling 15 years of silence. The first step was confirmation. Samples were taken, DNA extracted, and compared to the genetic profiles her family had provided all those years ago. Within days, the results returned. There was no question. The bones belonged to the girl who had vanished after prom night in 2002. The family was brought in to hear the news. For years, they had lived in the limbo of not knowing, clinging to the impossible hope that she might still be alive somewhere. Now, that fragile hope was extinguished. Her mother wept openly, clutching the report as though it were both proof and punishment. Her father sat in silence, his jaw tight, staring at the floor. It was the confirmation they had dreaded, and yet, in some painful way, had expected all along. Back at the scene, the excavation continued. The soil was sifted grain by grain. Tiny fragments were catalogued, bits of jewelry, a single earring, fibers from her dress. The prom corsage, long since decayed, left behind faint traces of ribbon. These delicate remnants painted a picture that was almost too much to bear. She had been buried exactly as she was that night, in the clothes she had danced in only hours before. Forensic experts turned their focus to the bones themselves. Under careful examination, hairline fractures were noted on the ribs, as though from a heavy blow. The hyoid bone, a small, delicate structure in the neck, showed subtle but suspicious damage, often associated with strangulation. Though time had stripped away soft tissue, the skeleton carried silent marks of violence. Nearby, investigators uncovered something else. Rusted metal fragments buried a few inches deeper in the soil. At first glance, they seemed insignificant, the kind of debris one might expect in woods near a road. But closer inspection suggested otherwise. The fragments were once part of a vehicle emblem, corroded beyond recognition, but consistent with a car that might have been manufactured in the early 2000s. The discovery raised unsettling questions. Had she been forced into a car that night? Had the vehicle itself been used in the crime? If so, why were traces of it left buried near her remains? The case file, dormant for over a decade, was pulled from storage and spread across desks once. Again, detectives who had long since moved on to other assignments were called back in. Some were retired, others now senior officers, but all remembered the case. They remembered the frustration, the false leads, the way it had haunted them. Now with new evidence in hand, they had a chance to set things right. Every suspect was reconsidered. The older boyfriend questioned again. The coach, who had long denied any inappropriate behavior, scrutinized once more. Even the reports of the strange car idling at the edge of the parking lot were revisited, this time with forensic analysts examining the metal fragments for possible matches. The renewed investigation was not just about suspects. It was about the story itself. Detectives reconstructed her final hours, comparing old witness statements with the new evidence. The phone call made at 12:17 a.m., still unanswered after. All these years now seemed more ominous than ever. Who had she called? Why had the number been identified? Public interest reignited overnight. News crews returned to town. The headline was everywhere. Remains found in woods believed to be teen missing since 2002 prom. Old classmates, now adults with families of their own, spoke to reporters about their memories of that night, their voices heavy with guilt, as though they should have noticed more, remembered more, done more. The family, too, was pulled back into the glare of attention. They stood before cameras, holding hands, thanking the hikers who had stumbled upon the grave, and begging anyone with knowledge of that night to come forward. Their pain was raw, their voices cracked, but they remained determined that their daughter's death would not fade into silence again. Inside the lab, forensic science pressed forward. Fibers found on the dress were sent for analysis. Soil samples, taken from beneath her body, were compared to other locations, searching for traces of foreign material. The bones were examined under microscopes, capable of detecting even the faintest residue, particles of metal, hints of paint, tiny fragments invisible to the naked eye. One technician described it as listening to a whisper through the roar of time. Every detail mattered. Every trace could be the difference between another dead end and a breakthrough. The reopening of the case breathed new life into old files. Theories that had once seemed far-fetched were reconsidered. Witnesses, who had been teenagers at the time, were now adults, some with clearer memories, others willing to speak about things they had once kept quiet. Leads that had been dismissed were re-examined with modern tools. It was as though the town itself had been shaken awake. But if the discovery answered the question of where she had been all those years, it did nothing to explain the greater mystery. Who had put her there and why? The investigation was no longer about finding her. That answer had been unearthed. It was about finding the person who had stolen a 17-year-old girl from her family, from her future, and from the life she should have lived. The cold case was no longer cold. It was burning again. The discovery of her remains was supposed to bring clarity. Instead, it unleashed a storm of speculation that threatened to drown out the truth once again. The first twist came from the bones themselves. Forensic experts confirmed subtle damage to the hyoid bone, a fragile piece of the neck, consistent with strangulation. Combined with the fractured ribs, it painted a chilling picture. This was not an accident. She had not simply wandered into the woods and died. Someone had taken her there and ensured she would never walk out again. Detectives released this information cautiously, knowing that too much detail could compromise the case. But in a town already primed with 15 years of whispers, even the smallest crumb fed wild theories. The local paper ran headlines. Prom night death was homicide. Talk radio callers debated whether it had been a crime of passion or a carefully planned abduction. Social media, which hadn't even existed when she first vanished, now became a battleground of speculation. Old names resurfaced. The older boyfriend, who had always lingered as a shadow over the case, was questioned again. Investigators probed his alibi, tracing his movements on the night of prom with fresh scrutiny. Phone records, long archived, were revisited. His insistence that he hadn't seen her in weeks now looked less certain, against fragments of testimony that suggested otherwise. A former classmate, emboldened by the case's reopening, told detectives she had seen the two of them arguing behind the school gym earlier that evening. Then came the coach. His name had been quietly noted in early files, but never pursued aggressively. Now, with new eyes on the case, old student reports took on darker meaning. A pattern of special attention to certain students offhand. Comments that in hindsight seemed unsettling. And one particularly disturbing memory. A girl who recalled seeing him talking to her near the doors just before she left. His wife had vouched for him in 2002, but in 2017, detectives wanted more than words. His home and vehicles were discreetly searched, his credit card records re-examined. Nothing definitive tied him to the burial site, but suspicion, once again, began to circle. And then, the car. Those rusted metal fragments found near her grave became the center of forensic focus. Analysts compared them against databases of vehicle parts, narrowing down possible makes and models. It appeared to match a midsize sedan manufactured in the early 2000s. Detectives revisited every report of a dark car lurking in the lot that night. Witness statements, once vague, were now reinterpreted. One student recalled the car idling, with its lights off. Another remembered seeing her glance toward it, as though expecting someone. Theories multiplied. Some believed she had willingly gone to meet the older boyfriend, only for the night to turn violent. Others suspected the coach, arguing that he had used his authority to lure her into a vulnerable situation. Still others pointed to the mysterious car, convinced that a stranger, perhaps someone passing through, perhaps a predator watching prom night unfold, had seized the opportunity. Even more unsettling was the unanswered phone call from 12:17 a.m. That brief, 20-second attempt had haunted detectives for years. Now, with advancements in technology, forensic analysts attempted to trace it again. The number had long since gone inactive, but records showed it had been a prepaid sale purchased at a convenience store weeks before prom. No name, No address, just a ghost of a lead. Theories spiraled beyond the town. Some online sleuths connected the case to other disappearances across the state, suggesting a serial predator. Others insisted it was personal, that the burial site, so close to town, indicated someone local, someone who knew the area intimately. For investigators, the noise was both a blessing and a curse. The reopening of the case meant new witnesses came forward. People who had stayed silent in 2002 now spoke, emboldened by age and distance. One woman recalled driving past the school that night and seeing a girl in a blue dress standing at the edge of the lot, speaking to someone in a car. Another man, a former janitor, admitted he'd always suspected a particular teacher but had been too afraid to say anything. But for every genuine lead, there were dozens of false ones. Mediums called with visions. Strangers insisted they had seen her in other states. Some confessed to crimes they couldn't possibly have committed. Detectives sorted through the noise, hunting for the thread of truth buried among the static. The weight of the discovery shifted the narrative. This was no longer a story about a girl who had simply disappeared. This was about murder. And the town, once divided between theories of runaway and abduction, now united in the chilling certainty that one of their own might have taken her life. Inside the police department, detectives pinned photographs to corkboards once again. Her smiling prom picture at the center, lines drawn out to suspects, to maps, to fragments of evidence. It was the same ritual from 15 years earlier, but now infused with urgency. They had a body. They had proof of violence. They had to find the person responsible. But the question that haunted them was the same one that had haunted them all along. Why? Why would anyone target a 17-year-old girl on the happiest night of her young life? Why lure her into the woods, bury her shallowly, leave her dress to decay beneath the soil? Every theory offered a possibility. None offered peace. The reopening of the case had ignited hope, anger, fear, and speculation all at once. The truth was closer than ever, but it was also slipping through their fingers, tangled in rumors, suspects, and half-remembered stories from a night that had long since passed into legend. And for the family, the swirl of theories was unbearable. Their daughter was no longer just theirs. She had become a symbol, a case study, a headline. They wanted answers, not speculation. They wanted the name of the person who had stolen her life. But for now, all they had was the dress, the bones, and the silence of the woods. For her family, the discovery brought no sense of closure. It was not relief. It was not peace. It was a confirmation of what they had feared every day for 15 years, that she had been stolen from them, and that her life had ended in violence. Her mother described the moment she first held the forensic report in her hands. The words blurred before her eyes, the clinical language of skeletal remains and positive DNA identification, stripping away the girl she knew. It was a language of evidence, of process, not of a daughter who once laughed in the kitchen, sang in the car, and dreamed about her future. She wept until her hands shook, clutching the paper like it might somehow give her back what she had lost. Her father, stoic and silent through so many years, finally broke. Friends remembered him sitting alone on the porch, staring into the dark woods at the edge of town, his face a mask of exhaustion. For years, he had driven those back roads searching for signs, convincing himself that one day he might be the one to find her. Now, knowing where she had been all along, that hope turned into something darker, the crushing realization that she had never been out of reach at all. She had been in the very woods he had passed 100 times, just beneath the surface, waiting for strangers to uncover what he could not. The town felt the weight too. Schools held assemblies, teachers wept at podiums, classmates, now adults, with families of their own, returned for vigils. They carried candles, stood in silence, and sang the same hymns they had sung in 2002. This time, there was no talk of hope, only mourning. The case's reopening stirred resentment as well. People questioned how it had been missed. Why hadn't the woods been searched more thoroughly? Why hadn't the trail near the burial site been cleared all those years ago? Some pointed fingers at investigators, accusing them of tunnel vision, of wasting years chasing false suspects while the truth lay buried in the soil. Even some of the detectives admitted their regrets. One retired officer, his voice heavy with age, confessed that the case had haunted him. He remembered standing in that parking lot in 2002, staring at the faint tire tracks, knowing something terrible had happened. He said the memory of her missing shoe had never left him, that he had seen it in his sleep for years. And yet, for all their efforts, they had failed to bring her home. For her friends, the discovery was like reopening an old wound that had never healed. Some had left town, built new lives, but when the news broke, they were pulled back instantly to that night in the gym. The music, the balloons, the final wave goodbye. They remembered her laughter, her shimmering dress, the way she had danced without knowing it would be her last time. At the vigils, they spoke softly of those memories, their voices trembling with guilt, as if somehow they should have noticed more, should have stopped her from leaving alone. The high school itself became a shrine. Students left flowers beneath the trophy case where her photo was displayed. Teachers who had once graded her papers and cheered her on at games spoke of her with tears in their eyes, remembering her as more than just a victim, remembering her as a person full of promise. Even strangers felt it. People who had never met her, but had lived in the town long enough to remember. The missing posters spoke of a heaviness settling over the community. It was not just her family who had lost someone. It was the town itself. Robbed of innocence, reminded that even the brightest nights could end in shadow. For the investigators, the reopening of the case was bittersweet. They now had evidence, remains, forensic leads. But the burden of failure pressed down harder than ever. They admitted privately to colleagues that they had missed things. That the car fragments should have been found sooner. That the phone call at 12:17 a.m. should have been traced more aggressively. That someone should have searched that patch of woods more thoroughly. But in the business of law enforcement, regrets are written in hindsight, and hindsight is merciless. The emotional fallout rippled outward, touching everyone who had known her, even those who had only known of her. And yet, through all the grief, one truth remained uncheckable. Her story was not finished. The discovery had answered one question, where she was, but it had left the most important question hanging in the air, heavier than ever. Who had done this to her, and why? 15 years after she vanished from her high school prom, the girl in the shimmering blue dress was no longer a mystery on a poster or a face fading on the nightly news. She was found, unearthed in the silence of the woods, her dress frayed and torn, her story carved into the bones she left behind. But her discovery did not bring the neat resolution her family had prayed for. It did not return her future, her laughter, her voice. It only confirmed what they had feared for so long, that she had been taken, buried, and forgotten by the world until chance uncovered the truth. The case remained technically open, investigators still pursuing leads, still weighing suspects. But in the quiet hours, when the files were closed and the lights dimmed, everyone involved knew that some questions might never be answered. Who had lured her from the glow of the gym lights into the shadows of the night? Who had stripped away the promise of her future and left her beneath the earth? And why? For her family, the answers mattered less than the absence itself. They buried her with the care she had been denied for 15 years, her name etched into stone where mourners could come and speak to her, where candles could be lit without fear of wind or rain. At the funeral, classmates now grown wept openly, remembering the last dance, the laughter, the moment she waved goodbye and walked out into the dark. The town itself shifted under the weight of her story. For years, her disappearance had been a legend, whispered in hallways and passed down like folklore. Now it was a tragedy carved into history, proof that innocence could vanish in a single night, that even the brightest moments could end in shadow. Parents clutched their children tighter, warning them never to walk alone. Teachers lingered longer after school events, watching students leave until the parking lot was empty. The story had become a warning as much as a memory. Detectives who had worked the case admitted privately that it would haunt them forever. The missed chances, the false trails, the critical years lost to silence. They carried it like a scar, a reminder that time is the cruelest enemy in any investigation, erasing clues, eroding memory, leaving behind only bones and questions. And yet, in the end, what lingered most was not the theories or the suspects or the evidence bagged and filed away. It was the image of her, 17 years old, radiant in her dress, standing on the steps of her high school on prom night, her smile frozen in a moment that should have been the beginning of everything. That photo, once a symbol of celebration, now lives as the haunting reminder of all that was lost. She never came home. She never saw graduation. She never stepped into the life that stretched before her. Instead, her story ended in silence, hidden beneath the soil of the woods for 15 long years, until two hikers stumbled across the truth she could no longer speak for herself. The candle in her mother's window still burns, not because she is waiting for her daughter to walk through the door, but because it is the only light left to hold back the darkness of what was done. After all the years of searching, all the questions, all the pain, her family finally knows where she is. But they will never stop asking why. And for the town, for those who lived through it, the story will never really end. It will live on. In whispers, in warnings, in the quiet hush that falls over the high school every May when prom night comes again. A reminder that behind every smile, every photograph, every shining night, there may be shadows waiting just beyond the light.